And now we move to Jimmy from Michigan.
Yes, thank you. I will also, as I get ready, I will also ask for confirmation that I am able to share my screen and that you are able to see my PowerPoint. So it should be visible, yes?
It's coming. It's coming.
Okay, thank you. Well, so I wanted to just echo again uh, my thanks to George and to everyone involved for their tireless work on Simtho, as well as inviting me to join and give kind of a couple thoughts that I'd like to invite us to think about in terms of how Simtho can lead us forward into this Syriac semantic web, as George and others have coined it, and specifically how we might interact with other fields in this new academy where interdisciplinarity reigns supreme. As we all know, the modern academy is very much obsessed with this idea of interdisciplinarity. And rather than working strictly within our own disciplinary confines, we are encouraged and in many ways compelled to reach beyond disciplinary boundaries in order to push ourselves and our fields forward. As someone who kind of grew up as a scholar in classics departments, I can attest to the fact that this is particularly true in the case of classics, which has been trying and I would argue failing to rid itself of its Eurocentrism by ironically colonizing other fields. When classicists like myself enter into these new fields, we are confronted with a new set of texts, a new set of objects, ideas, methodologies, and essentially entirely new disciplinary libraries, many of which are not nearly as curated or as sanitized as the classical canon. As an itinerant classicist myself, I can attest to the fact that classicists are accustomed to having quick and easy access to virtually any and all texts in our canon. Even now, several years after getting my PhD and defending my dissertation, I'm not sure that I've ever had to interact with a Greek text that has not been edited. That might be my own fault, but I can say with certainty that I never read anything in the course of getting my PhD that was not edited, re-edited, retranslated over multiple times, such as perhaps one of the books of Thucydides' Peloponnesian War. This is because even if I didn't have access to a physical copy or given edition, resources such as the Perseus Digital Library make these readily available online. Other projects, such as the Packard Humanities Institute, which supported the production of a searchable repository of Latin texts, as well as a searchable database of Greek inscriptions, which was curated at my alma mater, The Ohio State University, offers us access to texts written on both durable and non-durable media. The same can be said for the massive papyri.info and the epigraphic.bank Klaus Slaby. Other resources make accessing and navigating this classical canon less daunting and also more affordable, especially for junior scholars. And so I lived on sites like the Thesaurus Linguae Latinae, which offers a searchable lemmatized edition of the definitive and utterly massive lexicon project that was first published online in 2002. Construction of the original thesaurus began in 1894, and it is still under construction. They have just gotten through their 9th volume of the letter R. Its scale is really unfathomable, but because we are able to search by lemma, we can identify individual words and phrases quite easily, giving us results like this one for the word civitas, citizen or citizenship. In 1972, work began on its sibling, the Thesaurus Linguae Graecae, at the University of California. First conceived by Marianne McDonnell, a graduate student at UC Irvine, the Thesaurus Linguae Graecae has grown to rival its sibling, the TLL. Its online version, first published in 2001, similarly provides scholars with an ability to search any given token by lemma in the whole of the classical Greek literature. It incorporates tools such as a live engram searchable concordance and hyperlinked tokens that take you to the standard lexica. Of course, now, thanks to George and Beth Marduthaw, Simtho, the sources at siri.ac, syriaca.org, and the digital Syriac corpus, we too have our own arsenal of online digital resources. We are able to search for a given word, and we are returned hits in different authors' texts and works. George and others, many of who are here today, have already written about the history of Simtho, the Syriac semantic web, and the pioneering role that Syriac studies has and will continue to play in the digital humanities. We've already seen today, obviously, how Simtho in its past, current, and future iterations has and will continue to facilitate scholarship. And so rather than recapitulating this, I'd like to invite us to think about how and why we should count on Simtho to welcome non-specialists into the field of Syriac studies as they begin to venture into the nooks and crannies of our wonderfully unsanitized library. So, in this new world where interdisciplinarity reigns supreme, what then is the role of a discipline like Syriac studies? Are disciplinary boundaries just meant to be obsolete road signs that read "Now leaving classics" or "Welcome to Syriac studies"? Obviously, I think not. I think that today, more than ever, the role of a discipline, and especially a discipline like Syriac studies, with a complex, growing, and wonderfully unsanitized disciplinary library, is to be self reflective about the ways that we curate this library and curate the stuff in it, the texts, the objects, and other things that we use and that we are interested in studying, as well as the ideas, questions, and methodologies we deploy to do so. In other words, how can we make navigating the Library of Syriac Studies legible and more accessible to our students, not just graduate students, but also undergraduates, high school students, members of the community, and other non-specialists? Simtho, obviously, in particular, offers specialists and non-specialists with a set of tools we can use to access and then navigate our own disciplinary library. We can take a 20,000-foot view of that library. We can see what constitutes it, what texts, what authors, and objects are included in it. We can also use Simtho to be self-reflective, thinking about what we count as a text. Whereas in classics, many of our texts are recreated, perhaps for the first time, through textual analysis and philology, many of our texts come from a unique manuscript witness or a small group of manuscript witnesses. Simtho obviously gives us this opportunity to take this 20,000-foot view and see what texts are in our disciplinary library, but also what we decide to call a text. We can also ask, what is an author in our disciplinary library? Especially in the case of Syriac, where there is a majority of anonymous authorship, pseudepigraphical authorship. What does it mean to attribute a text to an author, to quote an author, or to cite one? We can also think about what it means to create an edition and what editions are in our field. We can look at these large collections like the CSCO, the PO, and other editions that make up the majority of our corpus. We can also do more curating on Simtho. We can think about how we have curated our disciplinary library, both philologically and pedagogically. What taxonomies have we used to make these legible to our students and to future Syriac studies scholars? We can think about what is a genre. We can look at individual genres and understand what texts are in there. And we can also think about who is responsible for this curation and what do we mean by we who are the ones who are curating this disciplinary library. What are our taxonomies and what are those editors that use them? And in this way, we can take a 20,000-foot view of the history of our field. Before I close today, I just want to think about something that I came across and invite us to think about how this might be useful for thinking about what counting on Simtho means. I'm interested in the role of Roman legal terminology and Roman law in Syriac literature, and so I'm interested in finding out what this word hufarka, prefect or proconsul, does in Syriac. By counting on Simtho, I'm told that it returns 179 hits, 10 hits for every 1 million tokens. Two in particular stuck out to me. One is from this document, AMS 1, and another is from Mart Barsamia. The lines look, however, very similar. And if we click and learn more about these texts, we see that one is edited by Paul Bedjan and the other is edited by Will Curitan. They give different epochs, different dates, but similar genres, genre types, input methods, and all these other points on our metadata. So let's take a look. Bedjan's edition, which is dated to 1890, is of the martyrdom of Barsamia, a text about the death and martyrdom of a priest in Edessa. The text reads, and at that moment, letters from Eleusis or Lucius, the chief proconsul, father of the emperors, came to him. And here we can see an intricacy of Bedjan's editorial process. Rather than putting textual variations or different readings in an apparatus criticus, he puts that directly into the text itself. And here we can see one of his possible emendations. If we look at the edition from Curitan, we find it from the same text, the martyrdom of Barsamia. And at that moment, letters from Eleusis, the chief proconsul, father of the emperors, came to him. Curitan, however, does not provide the same emendation. And so if we compare these two texts, we see that they are, in fact, one and the same. But exactly where did both Bedjan and Curitan get these texts from? According to Bedjan's introduction, he says that the lives of the martyrs Sharbil Barsamia, Stramona Goria, and Habib were taken from the ancient Syriac documents of Curitan. And this is, of course, Curitan's 1864 edition. But where did he get them from? In the preface to this edition, offered by William Wright, he describes how the Syriac texts contained in this volume were discovered and transcribed by its lamented author so long ago, as 1848. But he does not say his transcription of what. After doing a bit more digging, we find out that it is a very famous manuscript now housed in the British Library and dated to 936 CE. Wright cataloged this document, this manuscript, in his catalog, and he tells us that it's a 10th century Syriac anthology of hagiographical texts. It's in vellum with 430 leaves, 43 quires, and 2 columns. And it served as the basis for multiple editions, for Curitan's 1864 edition and for Bedjan's 1890 edition, with emendations. It also served as the basis for multiple translations, Curitan's 1864 translation and Roberts and Donaldson's 1906 translation in the Ante-Nicene Fathers. And so by asking us to think about what it means not only to count on Simtho, to push us into the digital age and continue to push Syriac studies forward, but what it actually means to be counting on Simtho. We see that our library, on Simtho's library, this word in these two texts appear as two separate tokens, in two separate documents, and in two separate genres. Whereas in our ancient manuscripts, in our sources, they all derive from one single manuscript. And so by looking at this example, I'm wondering if we should think about who and what we are privileging by counting these tokens on Simtho, whether or not it is important to us to have these counted separately. And in many ways, it might be. Maybe we want to emphasize the work of Curitan and Bedjan in editing our manuscripts. Or maybe we want to focus more on privileging the manuscripts themselves and our unique relationship to these manuscripts. And in doing so, perhaps in the same way that we can count on Simtho for making the transition between classics and other disciplines feel safer, feel more recognizable for people who are used to this sanitized, color-coded library of the Loeb editions of classical texts, so that we can encourage them to look into the manuscripts themselves and get their hands dirty into our wonderfully unsanitized disciplinary library. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jimmy.
We hope you enjoyed the Simtho tutorials. Our Meltho Lab team in the Middle East continues manually correcting OCR'd text to give you access to more accurate texts. The Meltho Lab operation is entirely supported by donations, and it provides young men and women in the Middle East with much needed employment during a time of local crisis. Our project also promotes pride in their heritage as workers contribute to promoting their own culture.